nerds, what's up? So yeah, A Feast for Crows was incredible, and dare I say, my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire book so far. I guess that's a hot take, but today I'm going to tell you guys why I love this book so much. I actually read it the quickest out of any of the Song of Ice and Fire books so far, which I think is going to surprise some people because I think people find it the slowest in terms of plot. But for me, just like the character development grabbed hold of me and never let go. Like some of the other books, as normal in, epic fantasy that's long, like it has peak, ebbs and flows, and some parts got kind of boring and I read slower. For whatever reason, the Feast just gripped me from the second I started it and never let me go. I also feel like Feast had consistently the most emotional beats. Now, to be clear, obviously the Red Wedding is the mountain of all emotional peaks. You guys saw my reaction to that. That's probably the biggest reaction I've ever had in any fiction ever. So yes, that had the highest high. But I mean just consistently, Feast just kept having emotional beat after emotional beat after emotional beat. Yes, they weren't all like Red Wedding high, but I found it elevated compared to how I emotionally felt about the other books. It felt like almost every chapter ended with something that affected me emotionally. And honestly, from like the very beginning, I was pretty sure it was going to be a fire book, like almost immediately, because yeah, we have the prologue and then we kind of have two other chapters that for me kind of work a little like prologues because they're characters we haven't really seen before. And then we have immediately a Cersei chapter and then a Brienne chapter, and then not too long after a Jaime chapter, and I was like, okay, this is the book for me. Honestly, there was only one complaint I had about this book, and that was just, once again, some of the language George used in sex scenes. George. We got to work on your language a little bit. And to be clear, because we're going to discuss them later in this video, these scenes were incredibly important. So I am not arguing the content of the scene. In fact, I think they were incredibly important, particularly one for character development. Like the scene needed to be there. Just some of the phrases George uses, not my favorite. However, this was such a 5-star book, like such a solid 5-star book, that even that couldn't deter me, couldn't get me to take a half star off. I do think it's a perfect example, though, when people get angry at me of me saying that in A Game of Thrones, my A Game of Thrones review. Like, it is never the content that I dislike. It is just sometimes the language George uses around those scenes that bother me. And I think the Cersei scene in particular in this one was a perfect example of that. One more thing before we get going. In fairness, because I told you guys y'all had bad taste, I realize I am reading this in very different circumstances than probably many of you who have read it years ago. I looked up the publication dates and I realized it had been 5 years between Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows, and then 6 years until A Dance of Dragons with Dragons. So I understand that you guys who read it in that time period, like, didn't know that Feast would be split in this way and you wouldn't hear from half the characters. And also, you guys probably at that time still thought the series was going to be finished. So you guys were probably eager to find plot and see plot beats and figure out what was going to happen. Now, me coming into this, first I started the series with the expectation it would not be finished. And because of that, I think I am a lot more at peace with not finding out answers, because I went into this knowing that I would not get answers. And two, I did know the books were split by perspectives. Now, I didn't know which perspectives were in which book, so that was a surprise for me. But because I did know it was split, I feel like having those expectations going in and not really being worried about plot obviously put me in a better position to appreciate this book. That being said, though, like I loved it so much. I loved how character focused it was. Either way, I can definitely see this book maybe having a different reception on release than it does now. And I think I see that a lot with comments I got on a lot of videos saying that they felt they enjoyed Feast way more on a reread. I feel like I kind of got that experience when I read it for the first time because of what I just said. Okay, after that little disclaimer, let's jump in to what we're gonna talk about the rest of the video. First, I'm gonna do a bunch of character deep dives. We learned a lot about those characters, so I'm gonna break a bunch of them down. Then I'm gonna talk about some themes and motifs, particularly winter and knighthood. Then I'm going to discuss why I chose not to read the version of the book everyone wanted me to read, which was dance and feast combined together. I'm going to talk a little bit more about whether or not I regret starting the series knowing that it won't be finished. And then I'm going to end on some light predictions, some light theories I have. I don't think I'm quite ready for the deep theories, but I can give you a few. Okay, let's jump into it. We're obviously starting with Cersei because, oh, what a delicious viewpoint. As I said in my female characters video, Cersei is bonkers. And I always kind of knew that previously before we really got into her head. I viewed her as this loose cannon. You never know what she's going to do. She's always going to do like the worst possible thing. I think that didn't necessarily change. Like, this wasn't some redemption arc for Cersei like it is for Jaime. I think the biggest surprise for me is I read that first Cersei chapter. I got to the end of it and went, oh no, Cersei's dumb. Oh no, I thought she was really conniving and smart, and she's conniving and dumb. Oh boy, the stuff that worked out for her in the first books was kind of like luck. And that was really surprising to me because I had viewed Cersei as such this like intelligent character. And the minute I got into her head, I was like, oh, she real dumb. So that was a shock. It was so interesting. Like, I knew that Cersei was a selfish character, but when you're in her head and you realize she literally does not have the ability to think outside herself, she is so self-focused. Everything is about her. Are people betraying me? How could people do this to me? All actions are inner focused. What is best for me? What do I want? And I think that's such an interesting juxtaposition because we see Cersei talk a lot about how she is the smartest of the siblings when really, in reality, she's not. And it's very clear to see that Tyrion is obviously smarter than Cersei. Like, he's the cleverest of the Lannister children by far. We know that. Tyrion is very, very smart. But what I also think is kind of interesting is that Cersei also derides Jaime for being really unintelligent. And sure, Jaime isn't like Tyrion clever. Like, obviously not. But I think where Tyrion is kind of the foil for Cersei in classic intelligence, I think Jaime in a lot of ways is the foil to Cersei in emotional intelligence. Jaime understands how other people think. And I think we see easy evidences up to point to this are, for example, Cersei thinking Loras is straight. She has no concept that he was with Renly, whereas Jaime knows that. And Jaime also comes in, and I can't remember what the advice is, but kind of early on in the book, you know, she's just totally tearing things down with the Tyrells, and everyone's telling her it's a mistake, but if you don't agree with me, you're a traitor. And Jaime gives her this advice on how to kind of thread hurt feelings and how to appoint things right. And she follows his advice, and he's right because Jaime has the sense to what people are feeling. So, oh man, being in Cersei's head and seeing how she actually lacks both kind of the skills that her siblings have was really interesting, especially in viewing the speeches she always gives about sexism and being a woman. And this is so funny because I just mentioned how much I liked that speech that's given in a Game of Thrones by her. I just mentioned this in my female characters video, Martin's Female Characters Any Good. And I talked about how much I loved that scene because Cersei's right. And it's so funny that I made that video before being done with Feast for Crows because she gives that speech a lot more in A Feast for Crows. And the speech has taken on a super different flavor for me. Cersei's not wrong. I do think that she would be treated differently as a man and that they would, uphold her more because they ignore some of those things in men. But at the same time, she's also wrong because if she was a man, she wouldn't be any better of a leader. She's a terrible leader. And so yes, Cersei has faced sexism, but at the same time, no, that's not the reason why people don't want you as a leader in a lot of ways, because you would suck. You don't want to be a leader to help your subjects or to make the kingdom better. You want to be a leader to fulfill your own sense of pride, to push yourself up and give yourself the glory. And so, George, I love it because it's like even deeper now. She's right and she's wrong. And those speeches have such a different flavor now. And boy, I really, really liked it. Just to add in here one other interesting thing, because during those sexism talks a lot, Cersei talks about Tywin and Robert in particular. Now, to be clear, I do not think Robert was a good person. So I'm not like trying to defend him. But one thing I think is interesting about Robert that Cersei doesn't see is that Robert did take criticism, even if it wasn't always well. Like I think of the Game of Thrones scenes where Ned tells Robert like it is, and he gets furious, but then the next day it's like, well, you're right. I need someone to tell me that. And again, not defending Robert's behavior because I think it was gross most of the time. But again, Cersei is so removed from how others feel. And the same with Tywin, like people are loyal to Tywin because he's intelligent. And so I think it's curious how she really just like doesn't understand what builds loyalty. Now the Robert thing is very important because that sex scene that I could never read again in my life and be happy because of the way George described it, was important though, because I think that is the scene where George is showing us that Cersei is turning into Robert, but with like zero of any of his good qualities. And she is turning into these people that she abhors and has no self-reflection about it. How great. Getting to the end here, I weirdly felt a little bit of pity for Cersei at the end of this book. And to be clear, not pity because I feel sorry for her situation. She dug her own hole. I almost more felt pity because she couldn't see that she was digging this hole. Every time she made these plans, I was just like, girl, these are so stupid. These plans are obviously gonna go wrong. And so when they do, you almost feel pity that she doesn't see it happening. Like, that's how I felt. I almost felt sorry for her that you are so disconnected, so out of touch that you don't see it happening. Anyway, 5 out of 5 stars, A+. Amazing character development. I can see why a lot of people find her perspectives to be their favorites because there is just a lot of deep stuff there. Next, let's talk about Jaime. Now, Jaime's internal struggle we've already been privy to in the last book. Last 2 books, maybe, actually. It's all running together. So I liked the extension of it. We're seeing more his internal struggle with trying to become a swordsman again, his internal struggle that he's always had with, knighthood and honor and what that means for someone like him who everyone believes is the most dishonorable person, but inside he so deeply desires to be honorable. And I think a lot of those beats just came to a head in this book in such wonderful ways. And I think part of this is him coming out from under his sister. And by the way, I feel more convinced than ever that I am correct that Cersei was a groomer to Jaime. I know a lot of people don't like that I say that because they feel like I'm absolving Jaime of blame, which is not what I am trying to do. I'm not saying Jaime hasn't made good decisions. I jokingly told my friends, like, I'm struggling for my life trying to remind myself that Jaime pushed Bran out a window before I love him too much. Like, I am not saying Jaime has not done bad things, but I think he is slowly starting to reckon with the view of himself and the choices he's made and how Cersei has manipulated him. And that is complicated, especially when you pile on the feelings of, I let Tyrion out and he killed our father and it's my fault. And so now he's carrying the, Kingslayer and Kinslayer almost on his shoulders. And the way he gave Brienne this job because he is so committed to the oath he swore to Catelyn still to find her daughters. And now it's, well, I'm going to find a way to not to take arms against the Stark or Tullys ever again. And just seeing him like, I'm going to try to stick with it, but not telling anyone. It's just, those are just really high emotional beats. I feel like I'm not explaining this as well as I was explaining Cersei, but hopefully you guys understand why that is so emotional. And him trying to, I think the sword fight is he wants to still be who he was. He's lost such a big part of him, but at the same time, he doesn't want to be who he was. And I think that internal struggle is what makes his chapters just so excellent. I will also say one of my other favorite parts of this book that I marked was in a Jaime chapter, and it's when he's talking to his aunt. And I'm going to read it just because I really loved it. So his aunt is talking about how Tywin was the only person who stood up for her to dare speak against the match. of her betrothal, which also, what a great moment to hear about Tywin. You know, again, George telling us that these characters are complicated. And she says, "How could I not love him after that? That is not to say that I approved of all he did or much enjoyed the company of the man that he became. But every little girl needs a big brother to protect her. Tywin was big even when he was little." She gave a sigh. "Who will protect us now?" Jaime kissed her cheek. "He left a son." "Aye, he did. That is what I fear the most, in truth." That was a queer remark. "Why should you fear?" "Jaime," she said, tugging on his ear, "sweetling, I have known you since you were a babe at Joanna's breast. You smile like Arienne and fight like Tig, and there's some of Kevan in you, else you would not wear that cloak. But Tyrion is Tywin's son, not you. I said so once to your father's face, and he would not speak to me for half a year. Men are such thundering great fools, even the sort who come along once in 1,000 years. There's not much to say about that. Such just like a deep cut character moment there. I got a little emotional reading that, I'm going to be honest. The complicated relationships between the Lannister siblings and parents and how she just saw through it. Top tier moment. And then obviously at the end we come to Jaime burning the letter, which actually shocked me. When Cersei sends the letter, "I love you, I love you, I love you, please come save me, Jaime," I was like, oh, all this character development Jaime went through this book is just going to be wiped away because he's going to get this letter. And of course, he's not strong enough to deny her that. And then to see him get the letter, read it, and burn it. I'm sorry. How are any of you not giving this book 5 stars? That was an amazing moment. Like, we are moving forward. And Cersei's gonna have a rude awakening. And again, once more into her character development of she doesn't recognize the entire book that Jaime is not hers anymore. That she's no longer in charge of his emotions and thoughts because she literally has no ability to empathize or understand other people's emotions. Anyway, great. Loved it. Okay, next up, Brienne. Brienne is one of my top characters. I love Brienne. She's one of my favorite characters of all time, period. I feel like I already talked a lot about her in my female characters video, so if you're interested in that, you could go watch that. I don't want to repeat too much of what I said, but hers were my favorite chapters in this whole book because I love her, and I also love, like, we know where both Stark children are, and so the hopelessness of her journey, yet her commitment to being like, my honor is staked on this. Ooh, that makes the emotional beat so much stronger because, like, I was pretty confident she wasn't gonna find the Stark siblings. Like, how is she gonna find Arya? How is she gonna find Sansa? I mean, maybe. Sansa was like a little bit more because she mentioned maybe going to the Eyrie, but you know she's not gonna find it, yet she's staking her whole identity on it. That's stuff ripe for character development. Oh, I wanna say, actually, maybe my favorite moment was this. So when Brienne goes to get her shield repainted, literally the second she said, "I'm gonna get it repainted," I was like, if she repaints this dumb shield and it is Dunk's shield, I will go feral. I think that's actually what I messaged Kyle. I said, I will go feral. And then like 4 pages later, she gets it back and it's a tree with a shooting star. And I did. I died. I went to heaven. I was so happy because Dunk and Brienne are just like kindred souls. And I obviously love Dunk and Egg so much. And I almost wanted to quit the book right there, to be honest, because I felt like that was the happiest I was ever going to feel in A Song of Ice and Fire, period. Like, it's all just downhill from that moment. But that alone, there was a lot of great Dunk and Egg references, so I'm super glad you guys suggested I read it between Storm and this. But if it only had been for that singular moment, it would have been worth it, because I don't think I would have recognized the shield if I had read it the other way around. Like, I think I would have been like, okay, so she got her shield painted, and I don't think that what it was would have stuck in my head, versus Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, where that was like a plot point, what his whole arms were gonna look like, and it's also on the cover of it. So I'm very familiar with it. So that was definitely one where I feel like reading it in that order. I feel weird that like Brienne's chapters are my favorite and I don't have as much to say, but I do think I'll talk about it more later when I talk about Knighthood, because her story really, again, is exemplifying that what is honor, how can I be the most honorable? And it really is mirroring Dunk, I feel like, where she has to constantly reevaluate who she meets and how she meets and why and what it means. And obviously that is big at the end when she meets Lady Stoneheart, which we're gonna talk more about Lady Stoneheart in my predictions. But when she meets Lady Stoneheart, and it's like, she now has 2 conflicting honorable things. She is trying to honor what Catelyn asked of her. But she also has an understanding with Jaime and understands that he's trying to do that too. And now when Catelyn's like, no, well, not Catelyn, Lady Stoneheart, this is important. Lady Stoneheart is like, you gotta kill him if you want your life, and she won't. And it reminded me a lot of that journey Dunk has, where things it's just not cut and dry. I will say, Brienne's ending is the first time I questioned my bold statements about not caring that the series wasn't finished. We'll talk about that more later. I feel bad I don't have more to say about Brienne because she was my favorite chapters. I just think hers is a little bit more clear-cut, but I did love them. Okay, let's talk about Arya and Sansa together. These probably were the most devastating storylines for me personally. I keep saying the most devastating part in the book. This is what I'm trying to say. This book had a lot of quiet, devastating moments. I don't think I marked it, so I don't know where it happens, but the first time I turned the page and saw the heading was Elaine, or Alalaine, whatever, I didn't actually first recognize the name. I was like, oh, who's that? And then I read the first sentence, and all of a sudden it clicked, and I was like, the chapter title isn't Sansa anymore, because she has so removed herself from her identity that she no longer even thinks of herself as Sansa. I'm sorry, is that not emotionally gutting? Is that not devastating? Is this because all y'all hate Sansa and don't understand how devastating that is? And what's interesting is, if I remember correctly, it's almost back to back with the chapter in which Arya is giving up her identity. She is now saying, I am no one. And then the next gut punch is, I'm not Sansa anymore, I'm Allayne. The Stark girls at the same time, worlds apart, are completely being removed from their Stark identity. The Starks are more dead than they've ever been. Catelyn isn't Catelyn anymore, she is Lady Stoneheart. The Stark girls are no longer the Stark girls. They are no one, and they are Elaine. We don't hear from Bran or Rickon or Jon this book. And Jon's always been a Snow. Now, I view him as a Stark, but he's been a Snow. So it's more than ever, it was just so depressing feeling like they're gone. The Starks are gone. And as a certified Stark girl, that is very difficult for me. Anyway, I did love watching them both lose no, I didn't love that. I thought it was really well written, the way they are both losing their identity. The chapters are dark. It's all about survival. What are you going to do to survive what is happening to you? And in many ways, Sansa's story feels a lot darker to me. I am so depressed every time I read it. Her having to take care of Robert, who's the worst, and Peter. Peter is just the worst. Littlefinger is the worst. Every time he kisses Sansa, I want to puke and die a little more inside. There is no redeeming this at this point for me. Like, ugh, gross. Arya always feels like she has more agency. Like, I'm not saying her situation doesn't suck, but there's something about Arya's character that just makes it feel like she is making a decision. And so that helps, I think, dispel the darkness that is her timeline still. The moment of Arya's that is really sticks with me is when she kills the bard. What a great scene. How she just has the boots, and I didn't get it. And then she came back and said, oh, somebody killed so-and-so. And you're like, oh. And then who killed him? Arya Stark. I'm sorry. Amazing. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm super interested to see where Arya goes because she's slowly been getting darker, freer to kill. Last book, we heard a lot of internal monologue about if Jon would understand. We get less of that in this book. So, as her story progresses, where is that going to go? Okay, Sam, my dear old Samwell. Like Brienne, I loved Sam's chapters, but I feel like I don't have as much that I want to detail and discuss with it. I will say another huge emotional beat is when you find out that Gilly switched the babies, which I kind of had an inkling of. I'm just going to say, I was like, she's crying so much. Did something happen with the babies? But I didn't have it full formed until it was revealed. So it wasn't like I guessed it, but I felt something there that was happening. I mean, another devastating moment. And the thing with Sam, I think what's really sad is I'm pretty sure, well, no, I know, right? I don't think any of the character perspectives in this book are character perspectives in the next book. I feel like this was actually more of a start of a journey for Sam. It didn't feel as full circle as some of the other stories because I really would love to see Sam have to confront his dad again. I feel like until that happens, I don't really have a catharsis on what Sam's journey is. Now, obviously, the last chapter with Sam had a lot in it. I actually ended up rereading it and rereading the prologue because I could tell I was missing some things. So I'll talk about that in my theory section. But yeah, I like seeing Sam kind of evolve, and he's still making the same mistakes, but I think his evolving is very a slow evolve. I'm also super curious to hear Jon's perspective, because obviously Sam hates what Jon has done. And another, again, great moment, who tells him, I can't remember who says it, but he's like, I can't believe Jon would switch these babies. It's so callous. When did Jon become this? And it must have been Maester Aemon was like, when you raised him to Lord Captain. That's when it happened. Great. Love it. I'm going to just put together Arienne and the Greyjoys into one section. I know that's probably going to bother some people. I will admit, like, of all of the viewpoints, these ones were the least interesting. That's not saying much in a 5 out of 5 star book that I like raced through because I loved so much, but just in general, I'm more connected, obviously, to these other characters that I know more. I really liked getting to know Arienne better. It was very much a bait and switch, because at first I was kind of on Arienne's side. I was like, oh yeah, this is interesting. Like, great, let's do it. And then when she talks to her father at the end, I'm like, oh, you did mess up. I'm not on your side anymore, and you're being really cocky and arrogant right now when you done messed up. Maybe you should take some responsibility. I think that's my big thing. I just hate when characters can't take responsibility for things that they've done. That's Cersei's big problem too. But I love Arienne as a character still. I'm curious how that's going to play out now, especially with Marcella, because she's injured, and that, I mean, Cersei is going to freak out. Can Cersei freak out, actually? She's in jail. Things to ponder. The King's Moot was also a great storyline, really interesting. Aaron, A-E-R-O-N, whatever, priest guy. I actually thought that was such a great perspective. I guess people might be divided on him, but he's also kind of bonkers. I cannot believe they drown people and then CPR them back to life. And I think the characters that are so devout to their gods bring such an interesting flavor to the A Song of Ice and Fire world, because you never know what they're going to do next, because they feel like they are being led. And so he did this King's Moot being like, well, the Crow's Eye can never win. And then he does. And it's like, So I'm curious to see what he does, because I feel like he could do some really unhinged things. He gives me very villain vibes. Asha asking that one dude, was it Eric, to stand up, and he couldn't. Peak comedy. I feel bad. I know Asha from my female characters video is a lot of your guys' favorite female character in the whole series. I am sorry to say she's probably like not even in my top 10 of the female characters. Not because I don't like her. She's great. I just find that she is more the typical female character I see in a lot of things. Once again, that doesn't make her a bad character. It just makes her less interesting for me personally. So I'm probably never going to have a lot at this current moment in time to analyze about her. We're taking a long time. I'm sorry. Let's just talk about a couple side characters I want to talk about, which is particularly Margery, Kevan, and the Hound. Ooh. So Margery and Kevan in particular, man, I can't help but love them. They really put Cersei in her place, and you gotta love to see it. You gotta love to see it. So a couple things about them. Margery, I was suspicious of in the beginning of this novel, just as like, I don't think she's as innocent as she's pretending. I think she's more involved in like the Tyrell plots. Like, I think she's very clever, and I'm also kind of suspicious about how much did she know about Renly, because she seems very close with her brother Loras, and so did she know? Was she taking one for the team for her brother? Did she not know? Like, it feels like she had to know, right? And then with Joffrey, her grandma killed him. So did she know? I'm leaning towards yes now, personally. But I do love her because I think she's actually trying to do good. I mean, good, who knows? I think she's at least thinking about the subjects, unlike Cersei. But yeah, when Cersei is like, oh, Tommen, of course you're going to be a great Lancer just like your father. And Margery is like, oh, I didn't know Robert was good with the lance. Like, yes, queen, go off. And then Kevan just telling her like it is. Kevan's one of the most interesting characters to me because I know the Lannisters are all very proud in general, and they're all very like four-house Lannister. I would not be super surprised if Kevan allies himself with non-Lannisters for the good of the kingdom. He's kind of giving me that sense right now that as much as he wants Lannisters in power, he is not willing for that to happen at the expense of the entire kingdom. So I'm kind of rooting for him. I'm curious if something's going to happen there. I guess I should talk about Loras too. I'm actually really sad that he's super injured. I didn't think I was that connected to that character until he got super injured, and now I'm like, oh, I actually kind of worried about you. Oh, finally the Hound. Let's talk about the Hound. So there are a few things in this book I'm kind of proud of that I picked up that we're going to talk about later because I'm convinced I'm right. But here's one I didn't pick up. So going into this book, I have a firm belief that if you do not see a dead body, they're not dead. There's a long story there. We won't get into it. This is already too long. But so when Arya leaves the Hound, I'm like, there is a 50-50 chance. Like, that dude's alive or he's dead. My theories were either he was dead or he had died, and the same people who brought Lady Stoneheart back to life brought him back to life. And that kind of worked with me because they were saying the Hound was going around doing all this stuff that didn't sound like the Hound. But in my opinion, once you're brought back to life, especially if it's been a long time, I think a lot of your personality dies. So I was like, well, perhaps that's what happened, and that's why he's acting so unlike himself. So then when we get to the island with Brienne and the priest is like, he's dead, I was like, oh, wow, that's surprising. Like, he is dead. Interesting. And that's it. And so then Kyle had to be like, he's not dead. He was on the island. So I didn't catch it. Full disclosure, I didn't catch it. I was like, oh, wow, he's at peace. He died. It's like, he didn't say he died. He said he's at peace. Very different. I didn't catch it, guys. I didn't catch it, but I know now. So my guess is we're probably not going to see a lot with him in the next book. That's probably one of those dropped threads, but I liked it. I liked that he's kind of working on the island, working on himself. Now I want to talk about winter is coming. Obviously, this has been a motif the entire time. Winter is coming has been said so many times. You're a sweet summer child. We're going into spring. We're going into fall. However, it makes sense that Sam's chapter was the last chapter for a lot of reasons, especially with how it mirrors our prologue. However, emotionally, I sort of wish Jaime's chapter was the last chapter. And the reason is when he looks out after burning the letter and it's snowing, he wakes up and it's snowing. Fall is gone, winter is here. That scene was so evocative to me when he wakes up and sees that snow in a place you normally don't see snow. Because if Feast is anything, it is the book where winter comes for every one of our characters. And I have basically explained that. Winter is here for Cersei. Winter is definitely here for Arya and Sansa. Winter is for sure here for Brienne. Every character's story ended in a low point. I mean, it is a Song of Ice and Fire, I'm sure it can get lower, but it ended in this low point. And so then for the book to end on the snow is here, it just really reinforced to me thematically how we see in the beginning all of our characters are in the summer of their lives and now they are in the winter of their lives. And the idea that the last book we know is named A Dream for Spring, that title's very evocative to me. Does it mean we would ever see our characters in spring? Or does A Dream for Spring mean at the end of the series, it would end with the hope that something better would happen? And we're never going to know, is my opinion. And so I like to think like, wow, maybe that is how the series was going to end. And right now we're in winter. I'm assuming because dance is the same time period from different perspectives, I am also going to be experiencing the winter for all of those characters. But I just really particularly liked how George weaved that motif through this book in particular. Okay, and then just a little comment on the knighthood theme. I think I've kind of said this in bits and pieces when I was examining the other characters, but another reason I'm so glad I read Dunk and Egg is I talked about how I felt The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was really a thematic prologue because it talks so much about what is honor. And no more than in Feast do I feel that tension of what is honor. And I love how he's exploring the themes of knighthood. Often the people in the stories who are acting the most like knights, like Dunk and Brienne, are the people who aren't, who do not get to claim knighthood. And then you have someone like Jaime, the struggle of honor and knowing why he made the decisions he made and not being honorable, but how do you reclaim honor? And will other people ever let you reclaim that honor? And what does that even mean? And like I said, with Brienne and Lady Stoneheart, who are you loyal to? Does that matter? And in the end, is it really your own personal code or is there a higher code? And I think so many of our characters are struggling with that on different levels. Sam with his ideas of Jon, and obviously Sansa with her fairy tales versus what she is living now. I just think that theme is so interesting. And it's also, I was on Chatting with Nuts on the Fantasy Network of a month ago or so. And he asked me a question. He was like, well, who do you think is darker, Abercrombie or Martin? And I said, without a doubt, Abercrombie. Because although Martin's books are dark, they are, I feel like Martin actually talks a lot about honor, and his characters, as gray as they are actually pretty concerned with honor on the most part and what that means. And so for me, that really weirdly gives a more hopeful tone to the books, even if really dark things are happening. Okay, why didn't I read the combined Dance and Feast books? So many of you wanted me to read the combined version. There's a couple of reasons, pretty simply. One, I am a publication order girl. When I was reading Discworld, everyone told me don't read in publication order. That's too bad. I read in publication order. I just like doing that. I like reading things as published, as the author originally intended for the first time. That's how I like to experience things. It was never a question. I was never going to read the combined version. I wanted to read it as it was released. The second, less reason is because I don't like to read things digitally. If you haven't been here, if you're new for my Game of Thrones content, I almost read everything physically. I hate reading books digitally. And obviously that was only going to be available digitally. So it was just not the way I was going to want to experience this book. Thirdly, I am so glad I listened to my intuition, because I really feel like combining those books would have made me appreciate both books less. Because this is a 5-star book for me, I can't imagine it being so much longer and weightier and with all these perspectives. I think it would have lost sight of what I think was being accomplished in this book. So yeah, that's it. I'm glad I did it that way. Okay, another thing we need to talk about, but it'll never be finished. Why are you reading it? This is so funny because I addressed this in my first 2 A Song of Ice and Fire videos, the Game of Thrones and Clash of Kings. I didn't address it in A Storm of Swords, and everybody took that as, oh, so you're going back on your word. You do regret it. And it's like, no, I just thought I talked about it enough, but I guess not. So we're gonna talk about it again here. I did jokingly say that the way Brienne's story ended made me question, but I realized, no, I have never said I wasn't going to be sad it wasn't finished. Go back to that first video. I never claimed I wasn't going to be sad. I can be sad. What I claimed is that I was never going to regret starting it. And that is still true, my friends. I am sadder now, knowing that I'm probably never going to hear what happens to Brienne. Yes, I'm very sad about that. However, I have no regrets. I rated the first 2 books 4.5 stars and these last 2 books 5 stars. Where's the regret? To be perfectly frank, A Song of Ice and Fire is not in my top 10 favorite series of all time. It's in my top 5. It's maybe in my top 3 if I'm really sitting down to reckon and consider it. Some of the best I've ever read, and I'm just not going to regret it. It's just the sadness of storylines not being finished aren't even close to outweighing the happiness that I receive reading the books. So no, I don't regret it. Can we stop talking about this now? I'm so tired of these comments. Let's move on. Okay, and finally, some very light theories, just some things I noticed. Cersei is pregnant. I'm 100% convinced. The minute she was like, oh, my handmaidens shrunk all my clothes, I was like, girl, you're getting fat. Oh, girl, you're pregnant. Because Cersei's like an unreliable narrator. So, that is going to be a big problem. And I really hope I get to find the answer or not. If that's true, do not spoil me. Oh my gosh, I should have said that earlier. Do not give hints. Do not be like, oh, eyeballs. No vague hints. No vague hints. Anyway, I think Cersei's pregnant. Jaime's gonna be the brother to kill Cersei, not Tyrion. If we assume that the fortune telling of Cersei is all coming true, she's worried a brother is gonna kill her, I'm convinced it is Jaime, not Tyrion. I think that is going to be the swap. Also, not convinced the queen that it's talked about is Margery. I think the queen that is talked about in that prophecy is probably Dany. Oh, I should also say this isn't like a theory. I guess it kind of is. Taina, whatever. The person who betrayed Margery to be on Cersei's side, never trusted her from the moment she showed up, thought it was too convenient. I'm still convinced she's on Margery's side. And the fact that she wasn't questioned and then just disappeared, I think I was right about that. And I called it from the very beginning. So I want to say that. Oh, also, I went back and reread the prologue after reading the ending because I was like, I feel like I need to go reread that. And these ones have been confirmed or denied for me, but I was like, oh, is the Sphinx Arienne's brother? The brother that's traveling? Kyle did inform me that I was half right. I was close, I should say, not half right. I was close. It's actually her cousin. So I was kind of proud of myself there. Like I kind of put 2 and 2 together. Almost made it. And then I was like, oh my gosh, the guy who kills Pate, he says, I'm no one. That must be someone from the order that Arya's joining. And we know Jaqen. Maybe it's Jaqen, but that's the only person I know. And Kyle did confirm that it was Jaqen. So I can get things. I can know things sometimes. I'm proud of myself. There's other stuff going on there. I feel like I need to reread the whole series before I figure that out, though. So my prelim thoughts on Winds of Winter. I am taking a slight break before I start Winds of Winter just because I have stuff I have to do. I need to do SPFBS stuff. I just have I have an arc. I just have stuff I need to read. I'm actually more nervous about Winds just because so many of the perspectives in Feast are what I loved so much. I'm worried Winds is going to probably drag a little bit for me. If I had to predict, this is going to be my least favorite one. Maybe just because I loved Feast so much. So I'll be curious. Now, Tyrion is one of my very favorite characters, so I'm very excited to have Tyrion chapters. Shockingly, I didn't miss him in this book. I'm surprised I didn't because he's like my favorite viewpoint, but he didn't feel missed in Feast, so I am excited to see him in Winds. I just wonder like what other perspectives are going to be in there that are going to beat the perspectives in Feast. Just doesn't feel possible for me, but I hope I am surprised. Also, I should tell you a little funny thing. This entire time when people told me that Feast and Winds were split, I thought Feast took place on Westeros and Winds completely took place on Essos. So I was like, well, that's going to be a complete Dany book. Like, I didn't even think Tyrion was in that book originally. So I was talking to Kyle and I was like, yeah, it's kind of like weird. We're never going to know that. And he was like, you get Tyrion perspectives. You get them. And I was like, oh, so that does make me feel better about Winds. That it's not like just Essos Westeros. It's like King's Landing versus something else. That's all I've got for you today. That was a lot. I'm looking at my unedited film time right now and I'm like, too long. But I hope you enjoyed my Song of Ice and Fire journey. I am sorry for telling you guys you had bad taste, but if you haven't ever reread Feasts, just, maybe reread it. Maybe go into it with fresh eyes now that you're not worried about plot and just think about the character moments. Tell me if you've always been a Feast lover. Tell me if you're on the right side of history. Anything you want to tell me, please, no vague spoilers. I can pick up on things, so when you put vague spoilers, it does kind of ruin. We're so close. We're so close to being able to talk about the whole thing, so just keep that in mind, please. And as always, if you like this kind of deep dives, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, or for example, you would have known a few days ago that I rated Feast 5 stars, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye. Some new Bookborn lore for you, if you didn't know. I am incredibly arachnophobic, and this video almost didn't happen. This just happened just as I sat down to record this video. A giant spider crawled from inside my microphone. I'm like sweating. Like think of the most arachnophobic person you can think of and multiply it by 800. I guess the Lannisters sent their regards.